Welcome to the Pastured Pig Podcast,
where we share the successes and challenges of raising pigs on pasture.
We talk to producers all over the country,
From small homesteads to large commercial pasture operations.
Whether you're new to pastured pigs or have been raising hogs for decades,
we hope you hear new ideas and new perspectives on pasturing hogs.
Here's your host, Troy McClung.
Well, hello everyone. It is great to be back for another episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. It's a beautiful day today. The birds are shining, the sun is singing. It's just incredible. Actually, at the time of recording this bumper, which is almost a month before the release date of this, so we're a little ahead of where we are on podcast interviews. So if this is cooking your noodle like it cooks mine sometimes, I record the interviews and then I go ahead and do the bumpers as well. And the bumpers are just what you're hearing now, and of course anything on the back end. Whereas I used to wait and do the bumpers closer to release date to make updates and discussion a little more fresh, but I found that was my bottleneck and my Achilles heel, that sometimes I just didn't get stuff done. So this is more efficient, but kind of makes things a little stale. So as you're hearing this bumper, it is August the 12th. But if you are hearing this podcast on the day it was released, it's mid-September. So hopefully mid-September Troy has had a lot more rain than mid-August Troy, because mid-August Troy is a little dry and a little aggravated right now. We've had West Virginia, our little spot, not even, the entire state is, the governor did declare a drought, an official drought in the state a couple weeks ago. But we've had pop-up rain. The tropical storm that came up through Virginia and stuff did dump a little bit of rain on the eastern side of the state. We've had pop-up thunderstorms, but it has always missed my farm. I've just been despondent when it comes to water. So in fact, after I'm done recording this bumper, Troy gets to go out and haul water. I have, in the 12 years that I have raised pigs on pasture, I have never had to haul water. I've never had our reservoirs dry up enough that I can't go just crack a valve on rain catchment and fill up a trough, or move a pig to a certain pasture that has either small impoundment or access to a hole beside a culvert in our stream. Never had to do this. So today I will be transporting water for the first time in my pig career, and I'm not happy about that. And what's kind of a drag is I don't want to challenge my well or tax my well anymore. So I'm actually going down the road with my mobile pumping system and setting my truck and trailer beside the road in a wide spot, throwing my pump down into the stream further downstream where there's more tributaries that dump into it, of course, so there's still standing water in it, and pumping water out of there. And it takes about an hour to fill up a IBC tote with the operation that I have. So a little bit of a bummer, but rain is in the forecast, but rain has been in the forecast for the past 2 months. But we'll see how it goes. Well, enough about me pissing and moaning. It is what it is. As the good book says, the rain falls on the just and the unjust. And I guess the drought falls on the just and the unjust as well. I'm not sure which category I fall into right now. Hopefully the just. All right, so enough yammering and rambling about me and my woes. Let's get into our discussion today. We have really good conversation with Taylor Brown, and Taylor is with Hoosier Seed Stock in Indiana, and he has quite a large breeding operation going on in 10 acres, and it's just fascinating. I'd like to set boots on the ground at his place and just see how he's got it set up, because his infrastructure, we'll get into a little bit, his infrastructure is key in managing not only the size of the breeding operation, but the variables. He's really into genetics, and he's really doing a lot of work in managing who breeds who and seeing the results of that. So I'll let him tell the rest of the story. I won't give all the secret sauce away here, and I'll catch you guys on the back end here. Today we're going over to sunny Indiana, and we're talking with Taylor Brown at Hoosier Seed Stock. Welcome, Taylor.
Hey, Troy, how you doing today?
I'm doing well. I'm going to have a little problem saying seed stock without saying seed sock, but other than that, I think we'll be okay. All right, so tell me a little bit about when I saw this come through the pre-screening info. It got my attention. It's like, Hoosier Seed Stock. Okay, yeah, I've never run into a pastured pig operation that's named like that. So that's kind of cool. So let's talk about the etymology of the name. I mean, people can draw the conclusion pretty quickly, but tell us how you got there.
Sure. So I have been a Hoosier since the day I was born. So Southern Indiana, where I've always resided. And since I was a little kid, grew up on a farm, and I have always just been enamored with genetics. So after I got out on my own and had a family and kind of were figuring out what direction it is that we were supposed to be going in, there was always this call to have a breeding pool of some sort of animals. So I grew up on an Angus cattle farm, and my dad is also pretty ate up in the same way that I am, and he really just loves the breeding aspect of it and trying to adjust phenotype and genotype. So, I come by this pretty honestly. Yeah. And when we struck it on our own, it just so happened to be, 2019 heading into 2020, and I came across this podcast, and I was hooked immediately and thought, wow, I've got to get into this pastured pig thing. So started scouring around, trying to find pigs that I thought might work for us. And then COVID happened, and we all know kind of what that was all about. And it became really difficult to source feeder pigs. And when we had kind of first started, one of the impetuses of that was some friends of ours that went to church with us had opened a butcher shop, and they wanted us to supply them with all of their butcher hogs. And kind of the way it worked out was I was supposed to give them 4 to 6 a month. So I went out and I bought I think it was 50 feeder pigs that first year. And that was right around the COVID days. And I got those initial 50, and then everything just dried up. So I already had the desire to have a breeding pool of animals. And then once things dried up in my neck of the woods for easily attainable feeder pigs, it just seemed to make sense. Yeah. So I started scouring really the whole country to select the hogs that I felt like would work in our system best. So we have some hogs that came up from Alabama. We have some hogs that I didn't have to go so far for, that were in Kentucky. And then the spots, they came from northern Ohio. And that's kind of where we're at today. We're still working with the same hogs that I originally went and acquired after deciding to start breeding. And we're chugging right along, or at least I hope we are.
Yeah, that's great. So just to recap, make sure I'm wrapping my brain around this. So really your background wasn't necessarily in hogs as much as it was the genetics and the beef and that type of stuff, and plenty of farm experience, but it just so happened you kind of find yourself moving into that direction because of the friend opening the butcher shop and that type of interest in, like you said, listen to the podcast and say, hey, this is something we could definitely get into.
Absolutely. I touched the very first pig of my life when I was 16 at a greasy pig competition at the 4-H fair in my county. And I didn't touch another one until I brought my first one home that I had purchased.
That's pretty cool. Yeah. The old grease pig, man. That was, I remember those days. That's awesome.
Oh, yeah. We won our $20. That was probably the highlight of my high school career.
There you go. So, wow. So, I just think I find it fascinating coming from this perspective of so you've got this desire to pursue the details of genetics and kind of this it's kind of a different angle, right? I mean, I don't know that I've 100 and some episodes we've done now. I don't know that I've talked to somebody. It's like, I really was into genetics and then moved into pigs. And so tell me, how does that influence? Obviously you drove across the country getting specific pigs. What were you looking for? I mean, why did you go with the old line Durocs and the old Hamps and some of the spots? What, in your experience in genetics, why did you land there?
Well, shortly after I found the pastured pig, I started scouring Facebook for groups to join because for whatever reason, that has been a really valuable source of information for me in, I guess in my piggery career. And I came across some old line swine groups, and there's a few of them that are really, really good, that have some really knowledgeable guys with tons of experience in them. And just through I was kind of creeping around on the internet, I was just watching, I wasn't contributing much, and just seeing what different guys were doing in different necks of the woods with, various kinds of geography and topography. And I quickly discovered that the show pig thing was not going to work for me. And I could also attribute that to you, Troy, because you gave me the best advice that I never listened to. So right around the, 2020, 21 time where all those hogs were being dumped out of the hog barns.
Yeah.
you had said on an episode, hey guys, you probably should not go and buy these pigs. And you told me that a week too late. That was kind of the initial stock that I got. So I realized, okay, I can't just go and get any pig. They have to meet certain criteria. They have to be able to move around well. Yeah. They have to be able to endure. At that time, I was running my hogs in a wood lot that I was leasing off of the family farm. So they needed to be pretty rugged to just get around in deep brush and hopping over sticks and logs and stumps. So I started looking for, most of my pigs are pretty long-legged. They're kind of tall. Some people would say that they're a little slab-sided. And what I look for, what I was looking for phenotypically was a long, tall hog that had plenty of frame in which to hang lots of meat from.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah. So that's funny you say, listening to the podcast episode. Don't worry. My boys don't listen to me either. So no, I get it, man. And I appreciate the shout out to that. That's great. But, So looking at that, looking at the genetics, looking at, kind of going through these Facebook groups, which I agree with you 100%. The Facebook groups are super valuable because we all have, little nuance to our farm and trying to figure out, what's going to work, what's not going to work. And you get to experience other people that have done certain things. And a lot of us just share the mistakes that we've made and you kind of go from there. So you're kind of standing on the shoulders of people that have been ahead of us. So, let's talk about your setup for an example. So when you decided, because you got me intrigued here with the initial foray. So you said, okay, we decided we want to get into pigs, and then my neighbor or my friend built a butcher shop, and so I went out and got 50 feeders. So let's unpack that a little bit. So where were you at the point that when they said, hey, we want to do this, can we get a couple hogs from you a month, and you decided to make this move? I mean, what was your infrastructure like? Where were you land-wise? I mean, did you guys already have stuff in place?
So my dad owns they're cattle farms, just about 20 minutes from where we currently live. And when I started with pigs, I lived like 10 minutes from the family farm. So anyway, we have this section of woods that's really, really flat and level ground. There are a couple spots that hold a little bit of water, but we called that space the patch woods. And that's where I had originally run those 50 feeders, and the initial of my breeding stock were also kind of located in that patch woods. And it was a pretty, like I said, level space, and it was rectangular in nature that you could drive along the entirety of one of the long sides of it. Nice. And the back long side was solid perimeter fence. So on the interior of this, I think there's 190 or 200 acres over at this particular farm. The patch woods was pretty well located in a way that it was tucked out of the way from the cows, so I wasn't interrupting what my dad was doing with those. And I had access to a really good, space to do this. And I started with kind of the wagon wheel concept. There was a central hub that they almost always had access to, where I had my water set up, and we were doing the barrels with the nipples at that point. And I had a few bulk feeders that they always had access to. And then I would open up a spoke that would run off into the woods. And I think I had 12 spokes that they had access to. And as we stayed there a little while longer, I did eventually move where the hub was at once or twice and tried to give them not the same paddock space every so often. We would rotate them between 7 and 14 days, depending on which particular spoke we were in and depending on how much rain we had gotten or hadn't gotten. And it worked really, really well there. The kicker became, after that initial, 50 pig purchase, my friend's butcher shop had a slew of issues that happened from, they weren't really sure what their market base was going to be. And then they had a fire that cost them their business. Oh, gracious. So that dried up rather quickly. And, we fortunately, God's been with them and they're doing something very similar now. And it worked out as well as it could have. But we've always been at Hoosier Feedstock pretty quick pivoters, I think. So we adjusted from that piece of ground to another piece of ground where we're currently at today near my wife's family. We live a quarter of a mile down the road from them. And we're at the top of a kind of a rise, and there are absolutely no trees on my property now on the 10 acres we currently operate on. And I can pause here. I know I've just thrown a lot at you. If you want to unpack anything about the first property, I'm happy to do that.
No. That's great. That's great. I'm sitting here and I'm a little jealous. You Hoosiers, you take for granted all the flat land that you guys have out there. So I'm just thinking, wow, throwaway patchwoods that nobody's really using. It's flat, and you can establish a wagon wheel in there. That's great. I mean, and that's what I love about all these different setups. You look and say, okay, what do we have? And you usually, when it comes to pasture pigs, you usually find land that's not being used, or it's less desirable for the functions that are going on around it, whether it's row cropping or, like you said, cattle or whatever the case may be. And then that's where you can just come in and insert pigs in, and it doesn't disrupt an entire setup. In fact, it value adds a setup because you're obviously improving the land in that area and obviously producing a product. So I think that's really, really neat. So you move. So kind of, why did you move out of the woods into the 10 acres? Was the woods not 10 acres, or it was smaller than that?
The woods was about a 12 or 14 acre area, and it's ideal for pigs. I really wish that I was located a little closer to the family farm now because of just how perfectly that worked out. And I think that's eventually going to happen again. Okay. But during that time, I was in full-time ministry. I was a senior pastor at a country church near where we were living. And we felt the call to, the Lord said, Taylor, you're going to be moving out of this at some point. And some acreage came available near my wife's parents, and we kind of always really liked the house that sat on it, and the price was right. And we moved, and I didn't really consider how big of a difference it was going to be from having this really well laid out wooded acreage to I don't have a single tree within my pasture space now. I've got some trees in my yard, but they don't do a thing for my pigs.
Right.
So it was a hard transition, but it was mostly inspired by a calling away from ministry and into this full time.
Yeah. That's interesting, and obviously we're both believers, so we won't get into a deep faith discussion here. But I do find it compelling and interesting when the Lord calls us in a different direction. We may think, hey, I'm called for ministry. This is what I'll do for the rest of my life. And as I've gotten older, I've realized and really appreciate that I don't think that if we're a senior pastor, the stresses that go along with that, I don't know that it's good for senior pastors to do that for 30 or 40 years, because you carry the burden of your flock. My goodness, that's heavy. And we're all called to be disciples, so you can do that. You can do that on the pasture. You can do that with your customers. You can do that type of stuff as well, and still be just as effective for kingdom work as you would be standing in the pulpit. So I think that's pretty neat.
Absolutely. Yeah, I found it's been so refreshing to be able to be a satisfied customer for the Lord rather than a paid representative.
Yeah.
It's been a really refreshing season.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I mean, that's something that we talk about. We guard. We have a pretty large church, and we make sure with the staff that we're guarding against don't become a professional Christian. That's not not what any of us are called to do, right? So yeah, it's okay. Am I building a resume? Am I doing this? Am I a pro when it comes to the business of Christianity, or am I a humble servant of the Lord? But anyway, all right. Well, I can go down that rabbit trail for hours, but let's get back into the pig pasture here. So the 10 acres of kind of, you said it was kind of on a hill, so obviously with Indiana probably getting some exposure to some weather whipping through there pretty good this time of year, the pounding sun. So was that just, it sounded like there was zero infrastructure there, so were you starting from scratch even when it comes to perimeter fencing and water and all that type of stuff?
Fortunately, this had been essentially a cattle feedlot operation here, but not super high tech. I had 2 barns in which to work from, and all of the perimeter fence was halfway decent, 5 or 6 strands of barbed wire. I don't remember off the top of my head. Yeah. But obviously barbed wire doesn't work terribly well for pigs. So I've had to go through, and now all of my perimeter is electrified, if not continually, at least whenever I'm rotating them from paddock to paddock. Obviously it's got to be hot so that they're not all over my place, right, or on my neighbor's place.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So, and that's the thing I always wonder too. So, your neighbors, I mean, do you have a lot of row cropping around you, or is other ruminants or other livestock that they're raising around?
We're pretty well set up in terms of the neighbor aspect. So directly across the road from me is a row crop guy who's also got, I don't know, 80 acres of cow pasture
Hmm.
right there. And then directly behind me is a guy who's got, it's just a 17-acre little piece, and he has cattle on it maybe 6 months out of the year, and then he just bales it for hay the rest of the time. And then there's crops all the rest of the way around me. I cannot physically see any of my neighbors' homes, so I'm far enough away from other people's homes that the pigs haven't been an issue in that regard. But I do have piglets that like to sneak either across the road to get into my neighbor's row crops or behind my place to just go say hi to the other guy's cows. That does happen.
Right, right. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm thinking is, you get a couple loose and they end up in a patch of soy or corn, and they're literally in hog heaven. It's like, yeah, how do you lure them back with feed when they're standing in a field of feed?
It's tough. I definitely I had one from my spring litter of this year that she escaped as I was trying to wean them all, and she just roamed around for quite a while. Never could get within even 50 feet of her, and she latched back onto another sow as I had kind of a second round of spring farrowing. So she nursed twice,
Oh, look at
and she was enormous, and she was going everywhere. I couldn't seem to get this pig caught. I have now, and
Yeah.
she is destined for the meat locker, I believe.
yeah, yeah.
But yeah, it's tough to call them back if they don't want to be called back.
Yeah, yeah. Oh, that's great. That's good. So it sounds like, obviously with the barns that was a good plus, and then having at least a majority of your perimeter fencing in place to use as a backbone. So did you set up a similar setup, a wagon wheel type situation, or is everything mobile now?
Most of my stuff is fairly mobile. The property here is set up a little differently. It's almost in the shape of an uppercase L.
Hmm.
So there, if I wanted to do a hub system, I have two halfway decent spots in which I could do it from. But since moving here, I would like to think I've gained a little knowledge and insight, and we've tried to be multi-species. So we've had ruminants, we had sheep for a while, we have dairy cattle now, and a few Dexter cows. So we try to have the pigs follow behind the cows wherever the cows are at.
Yeah, yeah,
Excuse me.
yeah.
But it's like I said, this where I'm at now is not ideal for pigs. I'm still trying to work through what the best management system for them is here.
Yeah. Well, and that's the beauty of keeping everything mobile. You're not doing heavy infrastructure for something that you may decide later. It's like, well, okay, I'm going to go over here and lease this, or maybe move over here and be able to take a lot of that with you, and not have that money tied up in fixed assets. So
Absolutely.
so let's talk about, so obviously you're not just raising genetics to sell as feeders or as breed stock. You kind of have an eclectic. You've been able to diversify with your pigs, and it sounds like maybe even some of your other livestock. But when it comes to pigs, what is your income streams, or what's your source of business with those animals?
The bulk of our business comes from feeder pig sales.
Okay.
It's like I said, nothing that I've done, but the Lord's just kind of had his hand on it. I think we've sold pigs in 7 or 8 states now. I don't know why those other states don't have pigs, but they don't for whatever reason. So feeder pigs are the bulk, just because we have as many sows as we do. Not all of them are going to be breeder quality. We have a lot of local guys who have been really good to us. They've been with us since the beginning, that will buy 20 to 45 a year. And we've picked up a few customers that are doing that are finishing either for retail sales to local, farm stores, or there are a couple guys that sell to some restaurants. After the feeder pigs, our next biggest thing is probably going to be our, two-way cross replacement gilts. We sell quite a few of those over the course of the year. And then after that would probably be boar hogs, selling some boars. We do a little bit of that. We do have a restaurant that we sell retail cuts to, and we have a small on-farm store, but it's mainly just to get us between farrowings. It's just a way to kind of help cash flow and have stuff on hand. We probably only finish for consumption 10 to 15 hogs a year, which was very, very different than what we had done initially.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, that's interesting. 10 to 15 is still nothing to sneeze at, especially if you're doing that as retail cuts. So I assume you're sending those USDA processing, bringing them back, putting them in the store, displaying them, selling as individual cuts. People come in and treat it from a straight up retail process.
We're one of those states that are fortunate enough to have state inspection. So we have a state inspected facility about an hour from my place that have been pretty good to work with. We've had some issues with them, but overall, people love the meat quality. We've just had some mishaps on the butchering side of things.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Don't get me started about that for sure. But no, that's great, and I love what you said there about having an on-farm store. Of course, allows that cash flow to show up when you're in between farrowings, because the weaning points and that type of stuff. Big spike in income, but then when those sows are going through that 115 days, it's like, okay, feed. They're eating a lot of feed. We need some farrowings here. But I assume so we hadn't really talked about it. I know it's in the pre-screening here, but I assume you say you've got 30 sow/gilts and 3 to 5 boars. So you have a lot of farrowing potential throughout the year, correct?
Absolutely. Right now, of those 30 that we have, only 22 of them are actually in production. The other, I actually think I have more now because we've had a few farrowings that I've identified some gilts that I think I'm going to retain. Mm-hmm. So of the 30 I'd mentioned in pre-screening, I think 8 of them are gilts that are approximately 100 pounds that will get into production, Lord willing, next year. But I think, assuming all goes well and the creek don't rise, we should have 35 gilts and sows that farrow for us next spring. Is kind of the goal.
Excellent. So how are you managing that right now? And there's multiple questions here, so we'll take them one at a time. But so right now, with that 30 to 38 breed stock on the female side, and then 3 to 5 boars, are you selectively keeping in paddocks? You got your boars over here in the bullpen, waiting to be called up to pitch type of thing, and you bring one in and let him have access to X amount of ladies, or you just have them all integrated? How are you managing that?
Well, I'm going to give you that age-old answer. It depends.
Gotcha.
So right now, the crossbred sow herd is our largest herd. So we've got, of those 22 that are in production right now, I think 12 of them are crosses of one breed or the other. Mm-hmm. So in our crossbred herd, what I've found to be really successful is whatever boars I don't have specific matings lined up for, they get turned in together into the crossbred herd. Okay. And as long as I turn them in when there are plenty of ladies in heat, they don't tend to fight very much. And I also store like-sized boars together as much as I can and raise them together, and that really cuts down on the fighting issue.
Yeah.
And then outside of that, I will select. So, we have Hamps, Spots, Durocs. I'll make sure that I have at least 2 purebred matings of those scheduled each, I call them rounds. Each round of farrowing, we'll make sure that we have some purebreds available because we might retain them, or we often have customers that have put in some pre-orders on those. After boars have been in for, I try and pull them around 45-ish days. Mm-hmm. I might just throw all the breeding females in together and leave 1 or 2 cleanup boars in there if I feel confident that the breedings that I wanted to take place have taken place.
The old cleanup boar. There you go. Yeah. No, that's great. And man, the management of that it sounds, and I know most of the people listening, have had their hands in pigs, so they know it sounds easy when you say it, but there's definitely some quite a bit of management there, and getting a boar to go here when he wants to go there, especially if somebody over there is still in heat or giving off some sign of that, then that takes some work, and of course it takes some infrastructure, and it takes very solid pens. That way your boars aren't busting out and finding, and then you're doing all of this on 10 acres, so that I'm sure adds to the challenge when it comes to keeping everybody sorted. Excuse me. So if I'm understanding correctly, you're kind of looking at 4 groupings when it comes to your sows, your gilts. You've got your Durocs, your Hamps, and your Spots, and then you have your crosses. So you've got those 4 groups, and then you're bringing your boars in. Like, say, okay, well, here's my. It literally is almost like a bullpen that you've got. Here's my full blood hamp boar. I'm going to move him in with the hamps and take care of that. Same with the Duroc, same with that, and then bring in whomever with the crosses. Is that how it works? So, I mean, you've got a full bred boar who's a Duroc, you've got a full bred boar who's a Hampshire, and a full bred Spot, and then you've got a couple other guys that are mixed.
Yes, sir. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think I can say I have a policy, but just to sound really professional, I have a policy where I like to have at least one boar of each of my pure breeds on hand at a given time. I've not lost a boar that I didn't have a backup for yet. We had one old fella who he was working until the day he died.
Yep.
And fortunately, I recognized he was getting older, and there was always going to be that shot. So we had a replacement lined up for him. But yeah, I think you have it pretty well correct. We are kind of working with something, and we can get into it a little bit, but I am starting now to retain a few crossbred boars just to see if I can have a color pattern breed true is ultimately what I'm trying to do.
Right. Yeah. So that's and that's kind of where I'd like to take the conversation next, because of your genetic interest and the experience you've had over the years, and really kind of exploring that. There's just so much fun in that, and I think the fun, and I put fun in quotes because if managed well. Best laid plans, right? You've got a plan in your mind. I want this boar to breed with that sow, and I want to see what it produces and keep track of that. So sounds like you've got good infrastructure in place. Maybe somebody slips through the cracks from time to time, but you've got good infrastructure in place. So how fun is that? Unpack that a little bit, if you would, Taylor, about just the excitement of being able to track each one of these generations of what you're breeding.
Oh, I love it. It is one of the most fulfilling things I've ever gotten to do in my life. So with the cattle, that's kind of what initially piqued my interest as a kid. You've got just such a long turnaround. It takes at least 2 years for a heifer to give you a calf. And that just, you cannot make very quick genetic work in a cow herd. Obviously, there are folks out there doing it, but I didn't feel like I had that kind of time on my hands, nor the space in which to do that. So with hogs, you can make some really quick genetic work comparatively, just given litter sizes, and you get 2 litters a year, or at least in our system you do. And what I really like about the 3 breeds that we predominantly work with, when you cross them, even if I had a boar break in, I can say with a pretty high level of certainty who bred who, because of the color of offspring that will result.
Yeah.
So a hamp breeds a Duroc, they're always going to come out as hamp-looking pigs.
Mm-hmm.
If a Spot breeds a Duroc, you're going to have this little cream-colored pig with little speckles all over it. So, working through that has been really, really cool. And we've noticed that, and I'm sure you have as well, that it seems as though the prettiest piglets always sell first.
Yeah. So
within our crossbred herd, we're trying to maintain as much uniqueness and variety as we possibly can.
Yeah, and so I assume you have Punnett squares laying all over the place on the kitchen table, that type of stuff. Were you just kind of keeping track of all that, or?
Well, I try to keep track on a spreadsheet, an Excel spreadsheet of who is who is mama, who is the sire here. Of our hogs, the only ones that we have that are actually registered are the Spots, and I'm fairly new to the work with the Spots. We've only had them for 16 months. So in terms of legitimate registration, we have hogs that we do that with, but we also try and keep those same sort of records on the rest of our pigs, just for consistency's sake and peace of mind on my part. Because though I could tell you, I don't have all my pigs named, but I could describe to you about everybody that I got right now in some degree of detail. But as time goes on, I know that that's not going to be the case. I'll forget who sired my current favorite Duroc sow. So having that recorded has helped tremendously. And we try and keep track of litter size. Litter size is a big one. That's one of our biggest data points that we're tracking right now.
Yeah.
Keep track of litter size, and keep track of number weaned. I'm trying to determine if there is some sort of a correlation between those that farrow first in a round. If there's some sort of a connection between fertility and productivity of the sow, and I'm kind of thinking we're starting to see some of that. There's a lot to it. There's a lot of nuance, and I'm not going to say I do terribly well with it. I'm not a statistician or a big numbers guy. But as much as this old country boy can wrap his head around something, I'm trying to do so with just the immensity of this genetic work I'm trying to take on.
Yeah. So you said already, excuse me. So you said already that that litter size is probably one of the biggest things you're looking for. So let's kind of go down that rabbit trail a little bit. When you're breeding and you get a litter, what out of that litter are you looking for? Well, I guess keeping that sow in rotation is one thing, but then her offspring, looking at them and confirmation things that say, okay, this is a feeder pig or this is potential breed stock. This may be a gilt that's moving over here. Are there key characteristics you're looking for, or you're just kind of feeling it out as they start to grow?
A little bit of both. So I know some guys who are really confident in their ability that they can judge the breeding viability of a piglet on day one. I don't think I'm quite there yet, but that's what I'd like to work toward, to be able to look at a piglet on day one and say, yep, I think you're going to work here. So we do a little bit of both. We will not retain a gilt for ourselves if she is not, well, okay, let me back that up. It depends. So we have different criteria for each of our breeds in addition to the crossbred herd. So for our Durocs, we will not keep a piglet from a litter that is less than 10 pigs born.
Yeah. Okay.
In our Hamp, we won't keep any that are less than 12 pigs born in that litter. And on the spots, I'm still trying to work that out, but I think 10 is also going to be our number for them. If you didn't throw 10 pigs, we're not going to keep any of your daughters. And the same thing is true about the sons.
Yeah.
Our crosses, they will stay in production as long as they can consistently throw over 10 piglets a litter. And we're kind of getting to the point where I've got a couple sows that were my very first piglets born on the place that we retained. They're probably going to be phasing out of production here in the next year or so, would be my guess.
Yeah.
We look for teat count. Each breed we want to see at least 14 teats on all of our pigs, but ideally we have more than that. Our Durocs especially, we're trying to get all of our breeders to have 16 teats, which is, tough to do because you end up with some pin nipples every now and again, and maybe you're not as even. You've got some that are offset. But we are trying to make the most maternal sows possible in all three of our breeds. And that goes to, the same with the crossbreds. Just with the crossbreds, they're more for the production side of things than we're necessarily looking for things phenotypically.
Excellent. Yeah. That's great. That's great. So, I agree with you on the litter size there. That you have to use that as the basis, because you can really start down a genetic path that you don't want to, and recreating some small litters there. So, man, there's all kinds of questions that have popped into my head. So looking at it, and it gets dealing with my own experience with having some farrowing issues and disease associated with that. Do you have a regimen, since you have such a high concentration? Do you have a regimen of healthcare? Are you doing vaccines, FarrowSure, that type of stuff to keep things going, or have you not run into any issues with that yet?
So I've tried to be really choosy in what pigs I bring on the place, and I think now I'm pretty confident we're going to be a closed herd from this point forward. I might bring in a boar in a bottle every now and again, but I try not to use AI if I don't have to. But we don't do any sort of vaccines. We don't give iron shots to the piglets. We will deworm sows if I can catch them a couple weeks before I feel like they're about to farrow. I will go ahead and deworm them. We found that gives their piglets a really good jump start in not having to deal with parasite issues. A lot of our customers prefer their piglets all natural, so we will leave it up to them. If you want us to go ahead and worm them before they leave our place, we'll do that. But if you don't want them to, then that's totally fine. But no, we don't use FarrowSure. We don't use any sort of flushing techniques. I might up the feed a smidge when I am turning boars in for the first 7 to 10 days. But it's only going to be maybe a half pound per sow difference than what their normal ration would be. Yeah. Just to, encourage some viability there. Yeah. But no, I'm a firm believer in low inputs. So if mama can't do all this on her own without me having to shoot her full of stuff, she's not going to work or last very long in our place.
Yeah. No, that's good. So So look at so when you're farrowing, so I assume you're not really specifically scheduling farrowings as far as the calendar goes. You talked about rounds or rotations that when a sow's ready, it's time to kind of get her back into the flow. So are you literally having farrowings constantly, like one a week type of thing, because there's this constant rotation, or have you been able to line them up and try to get them in groups?
We tend to have groups that will go, and I'd like them to be in maybe in three groups, but I haven't quite gotten that done yet. So I'll say we'll have a bulk farrowing that 80% of our hogs will have in the spring, and then I'll have a handful that will go over the summer, and then you'll have the second big bulk that will happen in the fall, and then we'll have a handful that will go over the winter. It's not quite to the point where I'm having them born every week or even every other. Right now, of my sows that I've got, all of them are dry except for two. I have two litters on the ground that are three-ish. One's 3 weeks old, the other one's 2 weeks old. So I won't have any more piglets, Lord willing, until September. So I do like to give myself a break, because having piglets coming all the time would be kind of a logistical nightmare for me, at least in my current setup.
Yeah, that's what I was thinking. It's like, it'd be one of those things where, if you're going out weekly and you're expecting a sow to farrow, then that really adds a whole lot more challenges, especially as far as how they even spend time together during the day, as different levels of litter sizes, and those who don't have litters, those that do, those who are about to wean, those that just farrowed, all of that type of stuff. So I figured that would be kind of tricky. Um, But I assume that does make for interesting castration days. Do you castrate before you sell your feeders, or are you cutting a lot in the spring and cutting a lot in the fall?
Yeah, for the most part, we do. We do have a handful of some bulk buyers that prefer them to remain intact for whatever reason. One of them likes to grow them up to about 200 pounds, and then they have a harvest of mountain oysters.
There you go.
But, their own. But for the most part, yeah, we do some castration. We have a farm intern that comes and helps. He doesn't wield the knife very often, but I've got him to come and help. My wife was a labor and delivery nurse, so blood and guts and all that stuff doesn't bother her so much. So she'll help on castration days. And I do have, I guess I would call him my hog mentor, who's an older guy in his 70s that he really loves getting to come out on hog working days, and he'll give a hand. So on the big days where we're castrating, and if a customer wants us to worm or something to that effect, I do have some folks that are happy to come and help me do all of that.
Yeah, that's great. And and the goodness, there's so many things. When I think of the size of your operation, what you're dealing with, there's so many things that when you scale up, it just keeps coming back to infrastructure. It's so key. So being able to catch up X amount of small boars that need to be castrated, just the ability to do that can turn that day into an absolute nightmare, or turn that day into just, well, this is another day on the farm. That's a busier day, but it's another day on the farm, and infrastructure really sets the tone for how that's going to come out, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So I saw Jordan Green on his YouTube channel, Farm Builder, I think is it.
Yep.
He does kind of the catch system where mamas are over here and there's electric that keeps them from getting to this catch system, that there's a bulk feeder set up for the piglets. We kind of do some stuff like that, but I've found on our place it's been a little more easier for me to manage, to just get mamas used to moving a good distance, within a week of when I intend to wean. So I'll start feeding them in one of my stalls that's large enough for 8 or 10 sows to go into, because then their babies will just start following them naturally, and they won't be terrified of going in there on that day. And so when the day of weaning comes, I'll run everybody in there. I'll pour a little bit of feed in there. Mamas will get antsy because they're not used to, there's supposed to be 3 times as much feed here as there is. Right. And they'll try and run out of the pen. I'll let them out. I have some sorting boards that we use. And that's typically how we do wean. So it's a little more intensive than what other folks do, but we've found that it kind of just works for us.
Yeah. And that's, again, you're kind of going with what what works, and what infrastructure allows. The catch-up systems, or what Jordan does and what I've seen other guys do, making the little cattle panel spiral out in the pasture and things. It's just whatever works for you, but knowing you've got a game plan. That's what I had to learn the hard way at the beginning. It's like, well, I'm going to go down here and I'm just going to grab these pigs. They're on 5 acres of pasture, but I'm just going to reach down and grab these piglets and castrate them. Being that naive when I was first starting. So, the infrastructure really comes into play there. So let me ask you one more thing about. So with this scale of breeding that you're doing, you have the opportunity in the spring and especially in the fall to have a lot of piglets on the ground, and of course, feed is our biggest input, of course. So how do you manage the sales of that and inventory based upon that? Are you just you're breeding to breed? You're not necessarily looking at any pre-orders or anything and say, hey, because of my orders for spring, I'm only going to allow this many sows to breed, or is it just, hey, Katie bar the door, let's just go, and we haven't had any trouble moving these piglets when we need to?
So far, I've bred any viable female that I could, and we have had very little trouble moving her piglets. Even at this sort of scale, especially in the spring, I could double my number of sows, I'm pretty confidently, and still not meet our spring feeder pig demand. Yeah. So we've done a lot of pre-ordering stuff. I don't think that this past spring, we actually had every piglet that was going to be born sold before it was ever on the ground. So that's the first time we've ever been able to do that. We've just recently started an email marketing service, the mass, keeping everybody updated via newsletter. We're really hoping that our pre-orders will go up as a result of that. Just trying to keep in touch with our customers more often, because if you're buying a feeder pig from me, you're probably not going to need another one for 5 or 6 months after you make that initial purchase. So we're really trying to encourage a sense of community in amongst our customers, so that we're always drawing them back to the farm. So that we're always trying to encourage them to, hey, you bought 5 last time, let's try 8 this time. Right. I'm sure that you figured out how to sell and how to market and do all this. And we've had some pretty good success with that. But yeah, we haven't ever had to say, well, we're not going to let old Bertha farrow this round because I don't think we're going to have enough market for that.
Right.
We tend to. We've not had an issue with that sort of inventory management yet. I know there's a possibility of it as we scale up, especially, but we haven't yet.
Yeah, but that's wonderful. I mean, obviously, that's great that you're in that situation, but it sounds like you've got outlets there that if you needed to, so you're not sitting there saying, well, I'm stuck. It's weaning time. I'm stuck with these pigs, and now I'm just going to have to raise them out and figure out what to do with them. It sounds like if there's less desirables, ones that are like, well, okay, not a genetic one I want to keep. Color's not that great. I could sell them off to feeders, but I think I'm going to take this small handful and we're going to move them over into just going to finish them here, and they're going straight into the farm store as cuts. So being able to have those multiple outlets of sales or logistics to say you're going to go here, here, or here. If you can't go anywhere there, then you're going to end up in this freezer here on our farm.
Yeah, we try to have multiple outlets. So we haven't done too many hog roasts yet, but we're kind of looking to maybe expand in that area because you always we'll have 30 sows in the spring. There will be some that just don't perform as well. Yeah. As much as I would love to see that number go away, it's probably not going to. You'll have one that gets stepped on and it'll always have a limp, or it'll just have a poor grower. So having that outlet of doing hog roasts, I think, will be pretty valuable for us going forward. Because we also line breed within our 3 pure breeds, oftentimes you're going to have some that aren't desirable for anybody. And those are the ones that we tend to retain ourselves and will, slow feed them. We won't necessarily try and pack on the pounds because it's just really inefficient with those kinds of hogs. And we will, those will go into our farm store predominantly. The less thans we tend to keep ourselves.
Right. No, that's great. Yeah, that's like I say, being a good steward of what you've been given and all of that, and having a plan for everything, and not just making a big pile of throwaway animals that you just discard. So that's good to have that plan in place. Well, awesome. Well, Taylor, I want to be sensitive to your time, so I'm going to close out with a question that I ask everyone. What is your favorite part about raising these pigs on pasture?
Well, I would say we've already talked about it, but that doesn't make for good podcasting. Genetics. I love genetics, but I won't use that answer. That's too chalky. I really love being able to see the impact that pigs can have on a landscape. And knowing that through my efforts, I can either have them destroy something or make a pasture lush and green and beautiful. It's been really awesome to see the tools that God has given the hog put into use in a way that restores and regenerates the land, as opposed to that common thought of, well, if you put a pig on pasture, they're going to ruin it.
Yeah.
If you keep them on concrete or keep them stored in a barn lot, you're just doing things incorrectly. And I'm still that guy in the neighborhood. We have people that will drive slow by our house and stare at us. I know we're kind of the village crazy people, but I kind of thrive on that. I enjoy thinking that there are people who don't necessarily think that we're doing is ideal or optimal. I thrive on that.
Yeah, that's always good to be the oddball in the neighborhood. There's really nothing wrong with that. So, well, great. Well, Taylor, if obviously you've got a pretty good stock there, if somebody listening says, hey, I'm close to Indiana, I'd like to talk to Taylor about maybe buying some pigs from him, how can people get a hold of you?
Oh, absolutely. So we have a website, and probably the easiest way to find that website would be through our Facebook page. Mm-hmm. And on our Facebook page, on our website, my phone number is there, my email is there. We do offer delivery to some surrounding states, and if we can also time up a load, farther out, we can absolutely get that done for you. So don't think that you've got to make the trip all the way out to the Hoosier State in order to get some Hoosier seed stock hogs. We can get them to you if you want them.
Yeah, excellent. So what is? So I would assume just get on Facebook and search Hoosier seed stock, and you can find that.
Yes. I would love to tell you that I have my website URL just memorized, but I don't. That's terrible. I can send that over to you, and maybe we can do it in the show notes.
I think you have it in the pre-screening, so I can drop it in there as well. So no problem. Well, great. Well, man, I really appreciate you coming on the podcast today. It was a pleasure talking with you, and I just pray you have success as you move into this fall season.
Same to you, brother. Thank you.
Well, I really enjoyed that conversation with Taylor. My goodness, there's so much more. I think we could have talked another hour about stuff as drilling down into his operation and management. As I said at the beginning, infrastructure on that would be so key to be able to manage things and to make sure boars are with the right sows and so forth. So I applaud him for what he's done there and the genetics he's been able to produce. Check below in the show notes and you can find his URL. And I'll see if I can find a specific URL to his Facebook so you can get his website. Or like he said, you maybe go to the Facebook page. That's probably where the best place to start would be in finding him if you want to reach out to him and talk about what he has to offer. As far as updates go, I want your all's input, if you don't mind. I know with podcasts, it's kind of broadcasting into the abyss a little bit. But those of you that support on Patreon, I can't thank you all enough. It really has been the motivation to keep going. But I feel like I'm doing you all a disservice. We've got 3 groups in Patreon and just haven't been able to produce enough extra content to feel what I think is justification for that. So I'm toying with the idea of taking Patreon down to just a $5 level flat. That those of you guys giving 15 and 10, thank you so much. But think about maybe bumping you down to 5. Everybody goes to 5. And at 5, it's kind of a just help keep the support of the podcast going. And then I still plan to produce extra content. There's things I've got in the works, just got to get them done. But I think that would help ease my conscience a little bit about you guys still paying some of these rates and just not delivering the deliverables that I think I should be, or at least maybe you expect to get. So email me if you've got any thoughts on that. Troy@redtoolhouse.com. I would like to get your all's opinion. See what you think, and or maybe even discuss, hey, have you ever considered doing this? I'm trying to think of just how to value add those that have been helping the podcast. And it's that challenge of, okay, if I create a whole bunch of content that's just unique to the podcast people, it's not fair to people I'm interviewing to say, well, hey, you spent the time to interview me, but only 40 people get to hear it because those are the only ones that are supporting on Patreon. So I'm trying not to put interviews in that category. I'm trying to keep the interviews open to everyone. So when we get, a couple thousand downloads, then somebody that came on the podcast, like, oh, okay, 2,000 people heard about my operation. That's what I think would be fair to my interviewees. So when it comes to content, extra content for for people. Maybe it is a benefit, or maybe it's an option of me just discussing topics. Now, we are getting a podcast in the queue, as I mentioned. There's a month ahead of this bumper. Maybe it's an early release, and maybe it has 0 of Troy talking in these bumpers. Maybe we'll go straight into the interviews. So if you guys find value in that, that would be some feedback that would be great as well. Also, as far as along the lines of podcasting, if you follow our YouTube channel, I've been testing this to see how it's going to work. But the podcast now auto feeds over to our YouTube channel. So YouTube, of course, is getting into the podcasting game. They're trying to be a challenge to Apple and Spotify and those guys. And so our podcast, all 128 episodes, are now over on YouTube as well. So if you're one of those guys or gals that wants to listen to podcasts, but you want to use YouTube instead of iTunes or something like that, then you've got that option as well. And that's also intrigued me to consider possibly integrating video podcasts. So granted, it's still just going to be talking faces versus blank screen. It's not like we're going to be out on the pasture looking at stuff, but like some feedback on that as well. See if you guys think that's worth it. Well, I pray you all have a great week, and I will catch you in 2 weeks with our next episode.
We hope you have enjoyed this episode of the Pastured Pig Podcast. To learn more about our podcast, or to submit topics, or recommend guests for future episodes,
Visit redtoolhouse.com.